Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we got something special. We got another top 10 list, the top 10 best hit songs of 2012. So this top 10 list is going to be a little bit different than the previous couple that I put together, mostly because I've actually made it before. So, alright, let's back up a second. As many of you know, I started on YouTube in July of 2013, but I had begun writing about music a good 2 or 3 years earlier, first on Facebook and then on 2012 on my personal blog, where I started assembling my list of the top 10 best hit songs of 2012. And while I've made reference to that year on Billboard Breakdown and another year-end list, I've never actually converted that list to video, which is what I'm going to be doing today with a twist. See, my opinions have evolved and changed over the past 6 years, and I figured it would not be a bad step to revisit the entire year-end Hot 100 and see if my greater critical acumen and hindsight had shifted my opinion. And while for the most part it hasn't really, I am going to be making a few changes from that original list that's on my blog right now. So there's no guarantee you'll know exactly what shows up here. But if there has been one thing that has been solidified by this full re-listen, it's that 2012 stands head and shoulders above the majority of this decade with some of the best hit songs of the 2010s. Pop was still riding out the club boom to a fair amount of success. Country was only in the early years of the growth of bro country and actually landed some real quality on the charts. R&B was notching some genuinely forward-thinking songs, and hip-hop, well, maybe a more transitional year there for that genre overall, but there were some highlights. But what makes the 2012 charts so vibrant for me was the indie boom, a flashpoint of out-of-nowhere crossovers from indie folk, pop, and rock that for a brief, shining moment redefined what a hit could be in the mainstream. And while it is dispiriting how much of it would just fizzle away in the coming years, and indeed, if we're looking at a theme for this list, it would be high points of potential never quite achieved again by a lot of these acts, it still left us with a list of songs where I actually had to cut some great tracks, something that you can't say about years like, say, 2016. So as always, the rules are the song must debut on the year-end Hot 100 in 2012, and let's get started with number 10. You know, hindsight can be a funny thing when looking back on 2012 and seeing collaborations that make perfect sense at the time, but likely would never make sense even a couple years later. But in a sense, if we were looking for a warm-up before 2015 made two of these artists into chart-dominating superstars, this is a point of humble but really quite wonderful beginnings.
So what, we get drunk, so what, we smoke weed, we're just having fun, we don't care who sees. So what, we go out, that's how it's supposed to be. Cause you know I'm high as fuck, young and wild and free.
You know, I don't know a single person who, if they remember Young, Wild, and Free, that they dislike it. Even if I get the impression that it's still underappreciated and is bound to wind up as one of those songs that'll be absolutely huge when it gets mixed into a montage or a meme in about 5 or 6 years. But before Wiz Khalifa got well over 3 billion views with Charlie Puth for See You Again, and Bruno Mars got nearly 3 billion for Uptown Funk with Mark Ronson, they teamed up with Snoop Dogg for a chill stoner anthem that was the lead single for a direct-to-DVD stoner comedy called Mac and Devin Go to High School. And really, Young, Wild, and Free is about the only thing that's worth caring about from that movie. The chill but jaunty piano-driven production from the Smeezingtons, which includes Bruno Mars, how effortlessly Snoop Dogg and Wiz Khalifa trade bars, Bruno Mars easing into that devil-may-care coolness that would come to define a lot of his later years, especially in his content, is a hangout anthem if there ever was one, with some genuine groove and a sort of blissed-out vibe that Jack Johnson would probably kill for. Songs this relaxed and naturally charismatic, they rarely get the acclaim that a flashier song would seize, but that doesn't mean that they aren't worth your time, especially when the hook is this sticky. You probably haven't heard this song in a while, but man alive, it is so worth it. Number 9. But on the topic of some of those flashier songs,
it started with the whisper, and that was when I kissed her, and then she made my lips hurt. I could hear the chit-chat, take me to your love shack. Mama's always got a backtrack when everybody talks back.
You know, the Neon Trees tends to get a lot of shit from indie critics, and for the most part, I have never thought it was all that deserved. I mean, sure, the band was certainly indulging in that sort of retro power pop that was shamelessly garish and neon, but it was also a ton of fun, and definitely more enjoyable than too much of the oversold melodrama you're currently getting from today's new wave throwbacks. And while Picture Show, their sophomore album, wasn't quite as sharp as the band's candy-coated breakthrough album Habits, Everybody Talks, it knows exactly how goofy it is and leans completely into it. Carried on the snide wildness of Tyler Glenn and a choppy guitar groove that careens into a monster of a hook, helped along by Justin Mendel Johnson's production glitz before it became really oversold in later years. Looking at you, Paramore. And hey, what's wrong with giving the gossip mongers the middle finger and a wild hookup for all of the wrong reasons? I mean, sure, it's a teenage sugar rush, it's complete melodrama, but it's a lot of fun as that. It's a damn good song, especially as it's just smart enough not to take itself that seriously and just dumb enough to try anyway. It's a terrific song, definitely worth the re-listen, and this band really worth a lot more consideration. Number 8. So I remember making a conscious choice to exclude this song from my list proper in late 2012. I had heard it all year, I was a big fan of it, but I had also gone through a really rough breakup at that point, and I was worried how much that song had connected emotionally, it might be kind of compromising my critical viewpoint. In retrospect, considering how much emotionality comes into the appreciation of any art at any time, because I really shouldn't have worried, because it's an underrated gem, been forgotten by entirely too many.
But I go out and I sit down at a table set for two, and finally I'm forced to face the truth. No matter what I say, I'm not over you.
You know, Gavin DeGraw is a bit of a tough artist to quantify. He broke through in the mid-2000s adult alternative scene when the genre was nearing its peak overexposure, with his biggest hit, I Don't Wanna Be, being a theme song for One Tree Hill, remember that? And I'll be honest, most of his work has not aged well. He didn't always have good production, he didn't consistently bring good material or vocals to the territory, and he probably would have faded with the other acts in that era by the time the club boom hit. But then he teamed up with Ryan Tedder to deliver what I might argue might just be his best hit, probably even his best song, leaning into the yearning earnestness for a monster of a hook that makes post-breakup emotions feel all the more big and more intense. And what adds to the tension beyond those big minor piano chords are the lyrics. And yeah, they're overwritten, they're a little bit clumsy, even for adult alternative, but just enough to capture that frustration of bottling up the emotions of a breakup that you know deep down, no matter how much you don't want to admit it, there's no going back to this situation, and any desperate hope must be left to linger and then just fade away. And really, it's Ryan Tedder's glossy swell that gives this song the majority of its impact, and while it was very easy to get sick of Ryan Tedder in 2012, you'll be seeing more of him on this list. But in the meantime, years away from that breakup, yeah, this song deserves to make this list. About time that Gavin DeGraw got this spot. Number 7. Oh, I wrestled with this one, because there were a lot of critics who panned the hell out of this song both then and now for retreading territory that, frankly, the band has done better on their previous records. And if there was any critical re-examination of that album from where this song came, yeah, kind of entirely true. There's a reason that record is remembered more for a misfired experiment and a concept that didn't make a lot of sense more than anything else. And yet, hear those arranged flutters, the blurry strings that breaks into a gloss of synthesizers and guitar fragments, where the artificiality of the heavenly swell underscores the wistful dreams likely unfulfilled, until that firmer piano and finer guitar movement provides the real foundation. Not even really a solo, but it works all the same, with layers of crescendos providing so much of the fuel to that elegant swell that shows exactly how Brian Eno's commitment to subtle dynamics can wring some really rich rewards. And sure, the lyrics are nakedly sentimental, and I will be the first to say that stuttered syllables and Chris Martin's falsetto, they're not an easy sell for anyone. I include myself in that category. But man, Paradise does not give a damn about coolness or groove, or approaches its huge melodies with the sort of uncompromising gusto for which I will always have a soft spot. No, it is not Coldplay at their best. I will firmly admit that, and I'm not sure the band will ever write a song that is better than Violet Hill, but it's the sort of ballsy swing for the fences that the band seems incapable of approaching anymore, and man alive, I wish they were making more music like this. At least there's this song to remind us of what really could have been. Number 6. So I'll freely admit, there is something a shade compromised in putting this song on this list. Given the living hell that reportedly was the recording process for this track, and the avalanche of horrible stories surrounding the main co-writer and producer of the song, I genuinely question whether I'd ever be able to go back to this material ever again and recapture the core of the brash, wild intensity that I love so much. Thankfully, great art can transcend some of the co-authors, and some other authorial voices, they can't be denied.
I hear your heart beat to the beat of the drums. Oh, what a shame that you came here with someone. So while you're here in my arms, let's make the most of the night like we're gonna die young.
So Kesha's Warrior is one of the best pop albums of the 2010s. I feel I don't need to quantify that statement much, especially if you heard the deluxe version of that record, but I stand by it regardless. That album is amazing. And well, I've already talked at length surrounding how horribly mismanaged and badly marketed that project was in a number of special comments over the years. The song that has lingered the most in the public consciousness from Warrior really is Die Young, a track that nearly was killed in the crib by horrible timing opposite the school shootings in Sandy Hook in late 2012. But years later, stepping away from all that, and with the knowledge that I'm not sure I'd put this in my top 5 from Warrior, Die Young really is a phenomenal pop song, anchored in a sharper acoustic groove that nails the power clash against the synth swells, and a wistful acknowledgement that even despite the magic definitely showing through in this dance party, it's only gonna last for a moment, and Kesha's gonna wring whatever she can out of it. And of course, for a version that leans a lot more heavily into the melancholy that's at the root of this song, I recommend the deconstruction version. I've talked about it before, which really reminds me of the right way to pull off the slow down, very wistful cover that so many artists will try and fail miserably at. Looking at you, Callum Scott, and Dancing on My Own. And yet, you know what? Through all of that, through a co-producer credit with Dr. Luke, and an album that deserves so much better, and the living hell that Kesha fought through to get this to market, at least to me, Die Young remains a triumph and a damn great pop song to boot. It holds up even beyond all the controversy, and I'm so happy to say it. Number 5. When pop music scholars look back on the Billboard Hot 100 in 2012, I can imagine they'll be kind of bewildered by the biggest song of this year, the most burning indictment of the indie crossover boom, and the sort of track that, thanks to a long slow burn and a Glee cover, became a #1 hit. And yet to understand the vast, weird potential of 2012, you need to understand this song, and oh, what a delight it was.
I don't even need your love, but you treat me like a stranger, and I feel so rough. No, you didn't have to stoop so low. Have your friends collect your records and then change your number. Guess that I don't need that though. Now you're just somebody that I used to know.
Hear all those clip guitar phrases, the marimba twinkles, the distant patter of percussion, the subtle curdled tension in Gotye's verses, the ebbing wells of eerie synth and the stuttered guitar phrases, and a hook playing in multiple levels of harmony both in the guitar, the synth, the marimba, and some truly terrific multi-tracking, and that's even before Kimbra shows up for the true gut punch in her verse, riding the quivering Mellotron sample to cut down that song's monologue with some very much needed context. This is a song that if you don't hear it in the context of 2012, it already is striking in some of its strangeness and eccentricity to show up on pop radio, even in indie rock, hell, given the deliberation of the arrangement. And when you also consider how smart it is, and Kimbra cutting through the gaslighting, and realize that this was the biggest song of 2012, it defies that easy explanation. Sadly, it looks like both Kimbra and Gotye will never quite reclaim that chart success years later, although with Gotye it doesn't seem like he's ever had much of an interest in it. He never actually put ads on the original video of the song, which now has over 1 billion views. But for a moment in time, somebody that I used to know, it broke the pop charts. And frankly, we could use a lot more stuff like this in 2018. Number 4. But on the topic of indie artists getting a sudden boost from Glee, and probably deserve to be far bigger than they are, let's talk about Fun, the indie rock project that scored #1 hit with We Are Young before lead guitarist Jack Antonoff went on to form Bleachers and co-produce some of the most recognizable pop music of the 2010s, spanning from Lorde to Pink and Taylor Swift. But in 2012, We Are Young was a moment of breakthrough indie catharsis, the sort of overwritten song that, like somebody that I used to know, threw open the doors for the indie boom, only to be revealed as kind of stodgy, underwhelming, a bit of a slog that wasted Janelle Monáe, and added up to a lot less than the sum of its parts. Now, if you want to know about the fun song that's actually worth caring about years later, hell, y'all know what it is.
Some nights I wish that my lips could build a castle. Some nights I wish they just fall off. But I still wake up, I still see your ghost. Oh Lord, I'm still not sure what I stand for. Oh, what do I stand for? What do I stand for? Most nights I don't know.
What's so striking about Some Nights, both in 2012 and now, in its audacity, the percussion-heavy stomper full of huge vocal overdubs that treats its guitar line and its gratuitous autotune as accent tones, confident in the monstrous hook coaxed out by producer Jeff Basker, and that it will overcompensate for pretty much everything. And what's incredible is how frequently it actually works. The glassy whirs surrounding the lumpy royal of percussion, galloping against Nate Ruess, pushing through one of his most dynamic vocal performances pretty much ever. It's a song that's earned a lot of comparisons to Queen for its theatricality and its operatic melodrama, and as heretical as that might seem, it's a comparison that's actually mostly earned here. Although Ruess leans on millennial self-awareness at exactly what's making a song like this, what it means for Fun's career prospects long-term amid some really huge personal turmoil. Hell, it almost seems like he's aware a track like this could end any future indie prospects as it proceeds through the breakdown at length, and yet with the irony that's all the more cruel in how that happened just a few years later for Nate Ruess. But you know what a send-off as he pulls all the more space between his internal dread. What a send-off indeed. If there is a song from this list that will be heralded as a 2010s pop classic from this list in 20 years or so, it'll likely be Some Nights. And frankly, very well deserving of it. Number 3. If there is a song on this list that has gone forgotten by entirely too many people, it is probably this one. The sort of quiet storm jam likely overshadowed by the other huge hit that he dropped that year. Oh, the critics adored it, and for good reason, we'll get to why. But in hindsight, there is a tragedy to how much it represents how little the artist behind it could follow it up in terms of experimentation and boundary-pushing R&B in the 2010s. But for a gleaming moment, oh, it was exquisite.
Do we separate? Oh, don't wanna give it all we both gave up. Can't take it back. It's too late. Reach the climax.
If you want to know why I've been an Usher fan for years now, okay, well, the album Confessions is the most obvious example, but Climax, it comes in at a really close second. A song that has some of the most wiry tension and intensity you will hear in modern R&B, anchored by Usher using his falsetto to absolutely gorgeous effect. Folks, this is the gold standard. If you want to know why I'm often so hard on bad falsetto vocals in any genre, this is why. But even beyond that, the incredibly sleek electronic production from Diplo, the sparse skitters of percussion, all of it woven into a stunningly sexy, quiet storm song where you keep waiting for that drop to relieve that tension and you never get it. In a year that's overloaded with warping dubstep, Usher ignores the conventions of that genre, almost post-dubstep, for the tightest experimentation of his entire career that asks the dangerous question of what happens when you hit that apex of a relationship, and you know it all could be very well downhill from there. And with every whirling, pulse-pounding crescendo to where Usher is pushing his vocal control to the absolute limit, you can't help but be yanked along for the ride, and oh, what a ride it is. Many critics of the time appreciated Climax for the construction and the experimentation. Like a new Tesla model, there's more admiration of the sleekness and the efficiency of this song, but the reason that Climax has lasted for me, the core of that emotional tension, and the fact that, yeah, Usher is just that goddamn great of a performer. Shame he could never properly follow it up, but man, this was a good step. Number 2. If you remember my list from my blog 6 years ago, you'll probably be surprised by the inclusion of this song, because it was not on any of my list. And really, if there was a song that got the benefit of hindsight and contrast more than any, it was this one. Another shot of pure, dark potential that's never been properly realized. But for a moment, in 2012, Carrie Underwood got so close to getting there, and while Good Girl has remained slightly more prominent thanks to its accessibility and stunningly difficult vocal line at any karaoke bar, this one's always been my personal favorite, because after all, the only good Carrie Underwood songs are when somebody winds up dead.
Every brick, every board, every slamming door blown away. Till there's nothing left standing, nothing left of yesterday. Every tear-soaked whiskey memory blown away, blown away.
You know, it's almost hard to describe why I adore Blown Away so damn much. Part of it is because there's little, if anything, to compare it to in country or pop. A murder ballad that's half revenge fable, half tribute to the Wizard of Oz and the twister that seals the abuser's doom. Hell, did you see the video? But what it reminds me more of is probably Wicked, particularly the darker songs from that musical like No Good Deed, that show the tortured heel turn done more in necessity than out of avarice. And that's not even getting to the shrill twinkles and the huge strings arrangement playing inside this massive, stormy mix, driven by the aggressive kick drum, all the pianos, the howling guitars mostly in the background, and a chorus that literally blows apart everything in its path, confident enough to rely on the abstract but visceral imagery from more of a child's perspective to show the purging power of that windstorm. And that's before you get to Carrie Underwood's delivery. And you know what? Look, I have been one of her harshest critics, is relying a lot more on vocal power than a lot of her texture and rawness in her delivery, but between the pre-chorus that forces her into a much rougher, lower register, and the sheer anguish triumph on her hook, it is absolutely one of her best. Let me state this again. Neither pop or country have any other songs like Blown Away, a whirling colossus that Carrie Underwood has never properly topped and deserved to be far more remembered than Before He Cheats or Jesus Take the Wheel or Something in the Water or any other formulaic pop country that she has churned out. And like so many songs on this list, Blown Away represents a moment of potential that was never quite achieved again, and all the more impressive and vibrant for getting there. But before we get to the ultimate example of that phenomenon, a few honorable mentions, starting off with
Every second is a highlight. When we touch, don't ever let me go. Daddy dancing in the moonlight. Take me down like I'm a domino.
remember when there was a shining moment that Jessie J could have been a serious pop star as the more vocally talented, more interesting version of Katy Perry? Yeah, you know what? If there is a song that shows just how close she got to that point, it was Domino. The tight, glossy synths playing off the main sharp riff, and Jessie J cramming in as many forced sex references as she could possibly can. And most of them, they only barely make any sense. And yet, I'm sorry, it's so infectious, and it's a fun in a way that Katy Perry would never really be again. And outside of Bang Bang, Jessie J wouldn't be again either. But hey, at that moment in 2012, there was hope, right?
Like a soundtrack to a July Saturday night. Springsteen.
I will freely admit that the reason this is on my list and wasn't before is because how much it just became a karaoke staple for me. But at the same time, it's hard not to listen to Springsteen and think that Eric Church was ahead of his time a little bit in mainstream country. As the ramshackle percussion and more atmospheric guitar tones, they would become huge only a couple years later, especially in 2016, playing off of lingering piano chords that show a real swell of actual melody that many coming later would unfortunately ignore. But the reason that this song resonates so much more powerfully is because Eric Church is as much of a music nerd as I am. So of course he's gonna stuff the song full of Springsteen references and a lot of that wistfulness and the same rich detail that made the Heartland rocker so impactful in his time. So yeah, it's fan worship the song, but it's of the best kind. And Eric Church, he knows exactly how to make it stick.
Cause they're calling, calling, calling me home, calling, calling, calling home. Show the lights won't stop me, turn to stone. You shine me when I'm alone.
So I know a lot of people will be very surprised this is not on the list proper, probably for many of the same reasons that I would have put Climax on the list. The tight, wiry bass grooves, the ethereal abstraction of the lyrics, Ellie Goulding carefully playing with more atmosphere that has seemed so much more swell than it might seem on the surface. It's a beautiful and eerie and absolutely haunting tune. I don't know what to tell you though, it got edged out, never quite hitting the real swell that Ellie Goulding would prove such a master of handling on later songs and deep cuts. Yep, even despite being a lot more commercial, I tend to like Burn more than this song. But hey, Light's still pretty good. Sue me regardless.
Let's have a party. Let's have a party. I love you, Red Solo Cup. I lift you up. Proceed to party. Proceed to party.
So if you've been following Toby Keith's career in the 2010s, you're probably very much aware of the spiraling tragedy of alcohol-soaked performances and the very slow collapse of his major brands. And yet, right before the slip into debauchery, Toby Keith put out one of his biggest charting hits, and while it's easily one of the dumbest on the surface, there's enough sly details and cleverness to show just how smart of a songwriter he could be when he actually tried, because yes, he did write this. The rhymes that are far more developed and complex than the wave of bro country hedonism that would follow him, the middle finger to Freddie Mac that reminds you that a song like this, it would actually have some deeper emotional resonance in the years coming after the recession, a lot of populism, and a sense about, it's almost excuses how the track is a half-slurred ode to a plastic cup. And I'm not sure if music needed this song, but hey, we got it from Toby Keith, and there's very little like it to this day. Probably for good reason, but hey, I still like it. It is weird looking back on Carly Rae Jepsen in 2012, before she became the indie pop princess that critics will fawn over all to more. Back when she was a contestant on Canadian Idol and was dominating the charts thanks to Call Me Maybe, which will not be making this list, and in retrospect hasn't quite become the nostalgia bomb that, say, 1,000 Miles has for Vanessa Carlton. But if there was a song emblematic of her vast potential going forward out of 2012, it was Good Time. A crossover with Owl City before his career imploded in unfortunate but spectacular fashion. And yes, it's a sugary blast of upbeat silliness that in no way earns the Prince reference in that first couplet, but even here, Carly Rae Jepsen is bringing her subtle charisma into her pop songs that might seem pretty simple, but wind up feeling like they mean so much more. Again, nobody would argue that this is an unbelievably awesome time, but for a good time, definitely worth revisiting, at least for me. This is probably one of my favorite Katy Perry songs. Certainly the best of any of the power ballads that she has pushed to market. And considering that I have been so hard on so much of her material since, nailing down what works about Wide Awake is really kind of tricky. I mean, sure, the sweeping synthesizers, the stately but rounded beat, they definitely work for me. I like a lot of the production, it sounds pretty good. And the lyrics, they have this melancholic desperation that Katy Perry actually pulls off really well. Hell, if you know what, if there's someone who actually makes this song work, it might be Katy Perry herself. The pop star with a very limited personality trying her best to emote with raw intensity that she rarely ever exhibits on any songs. It's one of the few times that I've actually ever given a damn about her as a character in modern pop culture. And while the rest of this decade would not be kind to her, artistically or otherwise, this song always stuck around, at least for me. One of her best ballads, and hey, I'd be happy to see her do more in this lane. Yeah, Usher's other big hit is gonna make this list too. Most because nobody quite makes dance pop R&B like Usher can, with a ton of pulse-pounding energy, the electric synthesizers, and Usher leveraging his huge range and massive charisma for all that it's worth. Now, I'll definitely say the lyrics can get kinda pushy in a way that I doubt would fly in 2018, but it's thankfully clear that he's leaning so hard into the sexual double entendres, which might be the first time that it actually saves the song. But even with that, the bridge is what really really puts this song over the top for me. An upward progression that pushes Usher to his absolute limit, and it hits like an explosive device. Perhaps not the sexual tour de force that Climax was, and Climax is the better song, but again, even when Usher is at his most direct and his most explicit, he can certainly deliver. And now for our final song, number 1. I remember every single time I have made this list, I've always surprised myself that this is my favorite hit song of 2012. Well, it's because I'd be hard-pressed to find anybody else who agrees or even really remembers this song in comparison with his other big hits just 2 years earlier. And that's before you consider how badly his career flamed out. If you want to make a list of the most jaw-dropping disappointments and downward spirals of the 2010s, I'm not sure he'd top the list, but for hip-hop, he would certainly be close. And yet in 2012, there was some sort of twisted alchemy that got it to work. The sort of pop rap that might not seem to have a huge shelf life, but still captured an effervescent moment thanks to Ryan Tedder's production. Yeah, it's B.o.B. and it's so good.
We ain't gotta rush, just take it slow. You'll be in the highlight, soaking up the sunlight. Anything you want, it's yours. I have you living life like you should. You say you never had it so good.
Those treble piano keys, the sweep of the production, how effortlessly B.o.B can layer his multisyllabic flow over it. Yeah, you know what, it's not quite the same intensity that inspired a lot of the Andre 3000 comparisons throughout his career, but the hook, the vibe, it's so damn infectious, it's hard for me to care. And yeah, on the surface, it's just another bragging and flexing song coming from B.o.B, but it's astounding how much of it has not only aged so damn well, a lot of the production too, but feels genuine and head over heels in love that's exceptionally charming, especially in the era of trap music to come. Unlike so many other rappers who want to emphasize how much better their lives are than yours and how much they are screwing your girl, B.o.B wants to take his girl on a trip around the world and rap about fine wine and art in a way where you gotta wonder if Jay-Z started doing the same damn thing a year later on Magna Carta Holy Grail for some of the inspiration of this song. But B.o.B plays into that casually light tone with so much elegance that you almost don't notice how meticulously some of his rhymes will connect, or how you could enter a track like this among some of the narrow list of hip-hop love songs that are actually fun and not fall prey to the overcompensating bravado or all the posturing. It's a fun balance between relative innocence and maturity that is a perfect match for Ryan Tedder's production and for B.o.B's delivery. And yeah, it's kind of dorky, kind of lightweight, look who you're talking about, but hey, that's who B.o.B was at that time. And when he fell prey to making the same meat-headed trap songs, his material took a sharp nosedive until he was rapping about the flat earth to stay relevant or have any hype at all. If there was a song or an artist that are more representative of the potential of 2012 just to go for broke, it's So Good by B.o.B. My favorite song of 2012 when I made this list, and 6 years later, still on top. Man, I'd go back to that day, but until next time, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.